I was 15 when my world of safety, security, and childhood came crumbling down. On August 29th, 2005, Hurricane Katrina made landfall in New Orleans. I have vivid memories of evacuation, sideways rain, and the unbelievable images of my city underwater. 19 trees fell on my house. 6 inches of water, minimal by comparison, caused greenish brown mold to creep its way up my bedroom walls, destroying memories and the facade of protection homes provide. I spent 1 week not knowing if my mother was dead or alive. Cell phone service was almost non-existent, and while I could text her, she didn't know how to text back yet in response. I spent 1 month in exile from my beloved city, from my home, from my community, from my friends. I spent 1 year working alongside my parents to rebuild our lives. We slept on mattresses on bare concrete floors with sheetrock and wooden studs peering at us, a reminder of all we had lost. Up until 6 months ago, I wanted to prove to the world that Hurricane Katrina didn't define me. But it did. I didn't want to share my experiences or feelings about the storm. I wanted it to just go away and live in a box in my mind. And then COVID-19 happened, and I couldn't help but flash back to the last time my world came crashing down. I was forced to be vulnerable, to admit that this wasn't the first time disaster and the fear of death touched my life. This wasn't the first time I was thrust into the wilderness. We are wilderness people. Our ancestors, both ancient and recent, braved the wilderness, from Israel to Babylonia, from Spain to Amsterdam, from Ukraine to New York's Lower East Side, from Ethiopia to Israel. But these are only a few of the physical deserts our people traversed, transforming themselves as individuals and transforming us as a people. We've all been in the wilderness before, emotionally and spiritually, whether at the foot of Mount Sinai or in the desperate moments in our own present lives. We are no strangers to the wilderness. Rabbi Ellen Bernstein wrote, many of our ancestors took to the wilderness. Abraham and Jacob and Moses were all called to forsake their settled lives, their homes, and their communities to endure a period of uncertainty and unfamiliarity in the desert. It was only in the unknown that true self-knowledge could be obtained. There they would meet God, discover their sense of purpose, and become Jews. Each and every one of us are braving the wilderness right now. We are in a desert of isolation, seemingly endless hurdles and obstacles. We cry out to God in moments of desperation. We want the wilderness to end. We want to reach the promised land, but we're not there yet. We are taught in the book of Numbers, Mi Midbar Matana, from the desert, a gift. The rabbis interpret this phrase to mean that when a person makes themselves like the wilderness, which is free to all, Torah is given as a gift. Because as it says, from the wilderness, a gift. We may not be able to understand the wilderness or make sense of it in our lives, but we can discern the gifts we gain in the process. The wilderness has much to teach us about being vulnerable, developing resilience, and finding personal and communal belonging. Mimidbar matana, from the desert, a gift. Now let's talk about vulnerability. According to Brene Brown, vulnerability is the feeling we get during times of uncertainty, risk, or emotional exposure. This includes times when we're showing our feelings and we're not sure what people will think, and times when we really care about something and people will know that we are sad or disappointed when it doesn't work out. The COVID-19 pandemic has laid us bare as individuals, as a community, and as a nation. We are scared to share how we're really doing because if we're really honest with ourselves and with each other, we know we'll fall apart. But what do we think will happen if we let ourselves really feel the loss, the fear, and deep pain we've experienced over these last months? Will the people we share with think we're crazy? Will they think we're weak? True vulnerability is courageous. Allowing people to see and experience the depth of our pain alongside us is terrifying, but God, do we need it? Since March, I have worried very little about our kids and their ability to survive and thrive in spite of COVID-19. After all, I did. I have, however, been deeply concerned over the emotional and mental impact the pandemic would have on our parents and adults who are taking care of children, worrying about and or taking care of aging parents, and or dealing with the fear of pressure of losing or maintaining employment during the greatest economic crisis of our lifetime. In addition to those adults who live alone. We can mitigate the emotional damage left in the wake of COVID-19 quarantine by allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, to share our experiences of isolation and fear. When we share our experiences with others, we remember that we are not alone. Activist Benji Hart writes, "Pretending I am not sad, hiding my sadness will not make me stronger. Suppressing my true self, denying the fear and rage that surround loss, is what in the long run will weaken me." When we talk of self-care, self-preservation, we need to talk not just about overcoming our feelings of grief, but allowing them, making room for them. Vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is courage. By being vulnerable and sharing our experiences of COVID-19, we begin to recognize that we are not alone. We begin to process our loss and grief. The wilderness is a place of vulnerability, but it is also the birthplace of resilience. Philip Gully, a Quaker minister, tells a story about his neighbor who had a lot of land, who wanted to create a forest. Each year, his neighbor planted a bunch of trees, but he never watered them. Instead, he would go out and give them a whack every now and then with his morning newspaper. He said he did it to get their attention. But why did he refuse to water the trees? He wanted them to grow deep roots. Trees will find water, but they have to reach deeper than expected to get to it. Gully's neighbor wanted the forest to be resilient. Gully thought about the idea of growing deep roots when he tucked his kids in at night and prayed that no harm would ever come to them. Everyone encounters hardship, he realized, and eventually he changed his prayer. He prayed for his children's roots to grow deep when the rains fell and the winds blew, that they would not be swept asunder. They would bend and change and continue to grow. He prayed for resilience. Resilience is not simply the ability to endure suffering or to bounce back afterwards. It is about the strength and speed with which we adapt to adversity. It is about how we might or even must change. Rabbi Rachel Mikva writes, "We each have a psychological immune system, essential for survival. It looks for meaning in our experience, prepares us to endure, and focuses our attention inward. But trauma can send this immune system into overdrive, and we fall prey to what psychologist Martin Seligman calls the 3 Ps: personalization, permanence, and pervasiveness." Regarding our current crisis, Mikva writes, "COVID-19 has triggered variations on these traps of trauma. Personalization, for many people, the sustained discomfort, inconvenience, and worse of sheltering in place can breed narcissism. The loss of physical presence has caused us to lose sight of one another in profound ways. So we personalize the crisis by making it all about us." Permanence. Increasingly, the uncertainty of the moment starts to look like the permanence of misery. Pervasiveness. The crisis has made it difficult to access many of our spiritual resources, such as the physical presence of and relationship with friends or family, the cultural richness of theater and art, the gathering of community and prayer, even parts of the great outdoors. Impacting so many aspects of our daily lives, it can blind us to the blessings that endure. It is possible, however, to learn resilience by training our minds towards a different way of thinking, by reminding ourselves that it is not all our fault, that we have agency in how we respond to the world around us, and that COVID-19 or whatever we're experiencing right now will not last forever. But it isn't easy, and we can't do it alone. We have to get out of our own heads by being in relationship with other people and by being in relationship with God. We have to lean into the impermanence of life. Gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass, even when it's hard. And the antidote to pervasiveness is gratitude. Gratitude for the many blessings that we have in our lives, even when everything feels terrible. It is possible for all of us to become resilient in the wilderness. We have all been braving the wilderness of COVID-19, and each one of us has noticed new cracks and breaks we hadn't noticed before. Each one of us has felt knocked around by the impossible nature of the world around us, wondering if there was something we could have done differently, if we're the only ones feeling this way, and if it will ever end. By being vulnerable, we begin to acknowledge the cracks that COVID-19 has caused in our lives. So too are we able to point to the glue that has not only held us together, but has made us even stronger and more beautiful. We have braved the wilderness and emerged resilient before, and we will do it again. We have the power to take our experience of being vulnerable, braving the wilderness, and developing resilience to foster and cultivate a sense of belonging to ourselves and to our community. Brené Brown defines true belonging as the spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. Before we can really feel we belong in our communities, we have to find belonging in ourselves. Before his death, Rabbi Zusia said, "In the coming world, they will not ask me, 'Why were you not Moses? Why were you not Joshua? Why were you not Abraham?' They will ask me, 'Why were you not Zusia?'" We have to own up to who we are to begin to find true belonging. The actress Viola Davis once said, "There is an unspoken message, but the only stories worth telling are the stories that end up in history books." This is not true. Every story matters. My father's story matters. We are all worthy of telling our stories and having them heard. We all need to be seen and honored in the same way we need to breathe. If we are able to say, "This is who I am, this is where I'm from, and this is my mess," then we begin to understand what it means to belong to ourselves. But in today's world, how do we begin to find true belonging in our communities? True belonging in community is deeply connected to spirituality, which Brené Brown defines as recognizing and celebrating that we are inextricably connected to each other by a power greater than all of us, and that our connection to that power and to one another is grounded in love and compassion. The key to belonging as a community is maintaining our belief in inextricable human connection. Right now, we are participating in a communal gathering, albeit on Zoom webinar and Facebook Live, that gives us the opportunity to feel joy, social connection, meaning, and peace. But communal gatherings are different than collective sacred experiences. Collective joy and pain are sacred experiences. Brené Brown says they are so deeply human that they cut through our differences and tap into our hardwired nature. These experiences tell us what is true and possible about the human spirit. We need moments with strangers as reminders that we are still inextricably connected. Each year, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur remind us that we need each other, that we are inextricably connected. But this year, for the first time in many years, we are processing our experiences of collective pain and loss. We have the remarkable opportunity to be vulnerable, to share our experiences of the wilderness, and to demonstrate our resilience this high holiday season. We are here together today, reminding ourselves and each other that we are not alone. We are in this together. We belong to ourselves. We belong to each other. We are in the midst of a collective sacred experience where it is impossible for us not to see how we are interconnected. It is up to us to live into this deep sense of connection, to cultivate a true community of belonging. This Rosh Hashanah, this new year, may we stop wandering the desert alone. May we find courage and strength in sharing our stories of fear and loss. May we continue to grow deep roots, finding stores of resilience, and belong to ourselves and belong to each other. L'Shana Tova, U'Metuka.